Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, a little bit of interactivity is going to go a long way. And yes, I echo Andrew's comment. I'm normally a bit of a mobile presenter, so if I trip or go awry in some way, please feel free to pick me up and put me back on the stage. My name is Aaron Steppatfull. I look after product marketing for our entire cloud infrastructure and management portfolio across Australia and New Zealand. And this entails a number of interesting roles, one of which includes a bucket load of research and finding industry relevance as well. And so it gives me great pleasure to actually present to you our software-defined data center vision, but we're also going to have a bit of a chat around some of the security elements that make the software-defined data center so much more agile while still being able to provide those safeguards in place that all of our industries rely on today. Now, I am conscious that we are running a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to do my best to try and make some time up. So please join me on this fun-filled ride. So a little bit of interactivity. Who here has heard of a product called vSphere? Show of hands. Yeah, I figured as much. It's still the market-leading product today, and it's a wonderful place to be. The interesting question is, how many of you have actually gone beyond just the base hypervisor? So how many people are looking at platforms like our vCloud Director portfolio that brings basically compartmentalization to application stacks and also the associated security? Can I get a brief show of hands on that one? Yeah, see, a bit less sporadic. Who's heard of something called vCloud Networking and Security, or vShield as it was formerly known? All right, a little bit better numbers. I think just by that little display there, you can understand that why we sort of feel challenged at VMware, because we develop all these amazing capabilities, and no one knows the platform better than us. So we develop these capabilities in order to make your life easier in securing these platforms. From a certification perspective, from an application petitioning perspective, from a trust zone perspective, we focus on these things intrinsically to ensure that you're not having to do as much heavy lifting before. The last question I'm going to ask is, how many of you are trying to apply traditional security constructs and methodologies to virtualized or cloud-based environments? Not seeing too many people own up to that one. Still a large practice that happens today. So there's a couple of cloud-enabling trends that do tend to scare the vast majority of security masses, one of which is, of course, software. We've come from an era where we have a lot of monolithic applications, and traditionally, with a monolithic application or a siloed application, it's very easy to wrap a security blanket around that because we have a defined construct. Now, defined constructs are wonderful, but they have an inherent challenge, and that is they're not dynamic, they're not flexible, they're not agile. So all the things that you want from cloud, all the things that virtualization was promised to deliver, you're kind of constraining. You know, you have a look at IT service management as an example, and ITIL was a wonderful thing. It delivered us a common language that we can communicate with our peers in the industry with. The biggest challenge around that, though, is it wasn't really geared up for virtualization. So stories that you hear from large organizations saying that they had to raise a change request to live migrate a workload from one host to another because all the configuration management went out the window, that wasn't actually a story. That's the absolute truth, and we've seen this happen time and time again. So standards, the moral of that story is that standards have to evolve in order to be able to track what the industry is actually driving us towards, and that is, in-depth managed virtualization and, of course, cloud. So distributed services are one of those things that's very difficult to contain without the right portfolio approach and the tools. The other one is really around platform. And we have gone from a lot of loosely connected and discrete resources into this fabric-based model. And Andrew touched on a point earlier which talks about convergence, and that's what we're absolutely seeing. And the software-defined data center, which I'll take you through directly, really looks at bridging those abstraction technologies across a larger part of the stack. And of course, to be expected, there's going to be a requirement for security professionals and a lot of other people in the industry to move along with the momentum so they can deliver the value back to the business that these approaches actually provide. So a couple of the key security concerns, and you may be familiar with a few of these, but as they pertain to cloud, Gartner, the bunch of smart folk that they are, they did a couple of surveys specifically aligned to security, and this was done last year. And of course, some of the big security concerns that came out of that one is there is a patchwork of security solutions out there. People are still fundamentally trying to apply things like physical appliances or like traditional approaches to this new world of virtualization and cloud. And not surprisingly, it's introducing a lot of complexity, a lot of fragmentation, and a lot of time in trying to bring services to the market. We have a look at how we're actually securing applications and data. And the interesting thing from this is that everyone understands the concept of an air gap. How do you get an air gap in a virtualized infrastructure? Any takers? Pretty challenging, right? Generally speaking, one of the things you really can't do. So what we have to move to are things like virtual separation and trusted zones. And these are the things that it's not a new concept as such, and we're seeing it far more mainstream now. But for people like the Department of Defense in the US and other large institutions to be able to use these things, obviously they get it and it works. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's absolutely an enabler to realizing these efficiencies. The last one is around IT compliance. Now, whether that's configuration management in the context of your own internal standards, or whether it's compliance in the context of regulatory compliance like HIPAA or PCI, all those usual standards, the perception is that, oh, I've gone virtualized or cloud, I can no longer bring those sorts of controls to the environment. Not entirely the case. If anything, we're actually simplifying it because we can do it across a broader scale in a shorter period of time. So it's around perception changes as to what these groundbreaking technologies and the evolution of these technologies can actually bring to make your life, once again, quite a bit easier. Also trying to apply static measures in a dynamic environment. When we talk technology, and yes, I work for a software vendor, but this software is one thing, the tools to manage are one thing, but the fundamental change in the pieces, that was a good merging word, the people and process that's aligned with these security practices. It's not just a technology story. You have to embrace all three. So what is the software-defined data center and how do I secure it? So who's heard of our software-defined data center approach? Whether you've read it in the market, a few people there, probably been to a couple of our roadshows. We do run a couple. So the long and short of it is it's an infrastructure where everything is virtualized and essentially everything's delivered as a service and it's all driven and automated by software. This sounds pretty straightforward, but I'll make it even easier. If we go through and have a look at what we did with this little guy, it's a CPU, okay? What was the one thing that we did that made life wonderful? Partners were able to build massive businesses around it. There were rainbows, there were unicorns, famine was abolished, all that sort of stuff. Pretty amazing. Customers did actually save billions of dollars in CapEx and OpEx by deploying these technologies just at that level. So what we did is we abstracted, okay? It's made a lot of sense. So what if we were to apply that same abstraction to other components of the data center? Like your storage, for example. How about your network environment? How about things like, oh, hang on a minute, security, whether it's intrusion detection, firewalls, whatever that might be. And of course, not to be forgotten, the tools, the people, and the process elements of it. What if we were able to take all those and build those into a software construct? Because what happens when you build something into a software construct? It becomes more flexible, more agile, easier to manage, in theory. We'll put it in practice. Now, you've got more than one of these things in each of your data centers, right? Obviously, a data center with one computer in it, maybe we'll get there one day. I don't think quantum computing's in the mainstream just yet. But as far as it goes, we tend to have multiple silos of these things kicking around. Now, whilst you've got siloed IT, and I do touch on this a little bit later, but what is one of the things that you can't do? You can't scale. Well, you can't scale effectively. So if you can't scale effectively, how do I expect to keep up with the demands of the business? So in order to bring granularity of control and scale to the environment, we have to look at things like pooling. So bringing all these components together in their respective pools, categorizing them, whether that's from a level of service aligned with a tier, or a level of performance or availability required from storage, or maybe it's a particular set of access controls and compliance standards, okay, on that networking and security side. So that's the next key, to pool the resources, because when you bring everything together, you have a larger resource pool to pull from, so you have a common infrastructure, but then I'm also very good at carving off the bits to the applications that I need while still guaranteeing their service levels. All right, these are some of the tangible outcomes that you'll get from the software-defined data center approach. The last thing to do is to actually automate. And automation is often a concept that's misused quite readily across the IT industry especially. So a lot of people confuse it with orchestration. So how many of you fine ladies and gentlemen out there today have an orchestration engine running the core of your IT function today, i.e. scripting? A lot of scripts in the environment? Don't be afraid. Yeah, it's quite an interesting thing because scripting is great. Usually revolves around the concept of an engineer sitting there one day thinking, you know what, I can do this in a far better way. So they beaver behind their console and they generate all these scripts and it's amazing. They say, yes, look what I can do. And basically it's a script that hits next based on some conditional formats and logic. The challenge with that is what happens if said engineer leaves after 5 years' time? Documentation hasn't always been an engineering strong point. And you tend to miss all the things that were done and all the elements of this script actually touching. So what you end up having is a rather brittle and frail integration of components that if you choose to maybe grow and expand your infrastructure, and all of a sudden an API change or something else happens, all of a sudden the scripting breaks, your orchestration falls over. The number of other vendors out there that are talking the construct of cloud via orchestration, it's a very shaky foundation to be on. And orchestration is typically tied to hardware. Right, that's the biggest downfall. What it does is it hides complexity. If you have a look at automation, automation is actually done as part of the machine. It's actually part of the tool set in the portfolio. So when you look at it from that perspective, automation is tied to software. It's tied to virtualized assets. And what it does, it doesn't hide complexity, it actually eliminates complexity. Okay? Abstraction helps us do that, and that's why with a combination of abstraction, pooling, and automation, you actually have a very solid foundation and you can move to the software-defined data center quite readily. So of course, the next thing is what you actually have a look at from an efficiency perspective and what you get out of this. So by bringing all these together, what we do is we carve this together in something called the software-defined data center, where all of these services are now defined by software. And you'll see a term in there called a VDC. Who knows what that is? A virtual data center. Never saw that one coming, right? Amazing. So virtual data centers are a pretty incredible construct because they can be aligned to a number of different things, whether it's a business unit, whether it's a complete organization, maybe of course it's a development life cycle or even a tier of service. Let's say it's a bronze, a silver, a gold, a platinum, whatever that might be. So the benefits around creating and policy defining all of those different elements across the data center is that it's two things. As soon as I get to deploy a workload into one of those containers, they inherit via automation all of those characteristics that actually makes them a service. This sounds pretty compelling, right? We're getting away from this paradigm where, you know what, to spin out a virtual machine, it was, it's amazing. It cost, $300. It took 2 minutes and it was there. And you went, wow, that's incredible. And they're prolific little bastards as well, I've got to say. VM sprawl is still a big problem today. VMs are so easy to create. We just looked at the VM. We always had to wrap around all these other services. And so what was 2 minutes and $300 turns into like 5 days and $1,800 plus all the other peripheral stuff on top of that. So this solves a genuine problem. The other problem it actually solves is it gets you away from this silos and IT approach. So the idea is that I no longer need a silo for my Windows environment, and that's what we're talking on to now, a silo for perhaps my Linux infrastructure, also a silo for all the other various things that I need to do. Wouldn't it be cool if I could have completely disparate workloads with different workload profiles, but have them across a common infrastructure? That sounds pretty compelling, right? Sounds like I can actually use this pooling and automation to a degree to deliver and guarantee service levels to what it is I'm trying to deliver back to the business. So this is what we're solving for, and the payoff is again largely around the efficiencies. So we go to be able to deploy a complete service at the right level of security, right tier of storage, and all the availability, so on and so forth, in minutes and seconds, versus what it used to be with virtualization. And yes, don't get me wrong, rainbows and unicorns aside, it did actually save a lot of time in this and effort involved in spinning out a workload. But we're going from days and hours, and which is a far cry and improvement from what we had to do in the physical world. Who still deploys physical workloads today? We know there's a couple out there. Yeah, there you go. 10 weeks, 10 grand, you receive the gear, it's on a pallet, you rack it, you stack it, you cable it, you load up the operating system, you test it, you burn that in, you put the application on there, populate it full of data, do some more security wizardry around that side of things, and then you might be up and running to be able to do some testing on it. Big difference. Virtualization solved a lot of problems and cloud goes even further, but you can't do it without the awareness on the security part. So I'm trying to avoid this becoming a product pitch, and I'm going to do my best to avoid that as well. But the long and short of it is we have a suite which gets you to the path of the software-defined data center in a fairly concise way. And there's a lot of elements to that one. Obviously, you've got still the physical server and storage that underpins it, and this can be multiple vendors. We have a large compatibility list that drives to that. vSphere is that virtualized foundation. It is still the world's best hypervisor by a long shot. We have obviously the software-defined storage and availability, things like Site Recovery Manager. Who uses Site Recovery Manager today? That is a wonderful product. One of the biggest things that brings benefit to is runbook automation. How long does it take you to test your disaster recovery policy? Sorry, let me rephrase that. Can you test your disaster recovery policy without a lot of heavy lifting? Very few people can. And there's usually a large binder of notes that's associated with that one. A large binder of notes and manual processes introduces one really bad thing, the potential for human error, which is still where the vast majority of problems come from today. So if you can automate that runbook and be able to hit the big red button to test it repeatedly and on demand, that's pretty compelling. That's what you get out of that stack. And there are new platforms that you'll see coming out later this year based on some acquisitions that we've made that really go a long way in pushing the network virtualization side and also the storage virtualization side as well. On the software-defined networking and security, we do have a complete platform for that as well embedded within the suite. We look at vCloud Director as that construct today around creating this virtual data center container, if you will, again aligned with those levels of service and business. Extensibility is important as well. We have a big focus on what we define as the hybrid cloud, being able to package up a workload into an industry standard format, move it across to an external cloud provider who, funnily enough, is talking the same language and using the same proven infrastructure as what we do, and we unpackage it the other end with the network and security context intact. Okay, and the management piece, this is where you get a lot of your efficiencies. We look at things like vCloud Automation Center. It was an interesting term, and Andrew, again, I'll use you as reference, but you mentioned that what happens if you bring your own device, and of course, if you don't embrace it, then you're going to have this challenge where everyone's just doing their own thing anyway, and you don't get visibility and control. This is where we coin a term called being the broker of IT services. So that vCloud Automation Center and vFabric application data capability brings us to that point. We bring awareness to say, well, you know what? You can have anything you like as long as you come through us to get it. So go off to an Amazon and spin up a workload there. Go to a Hyper-V, go and use your Citrix backend. Go and deploy a desktop or spin out a complete application on our stack as well. What we will do is we will bring the consistent policy and role-based automation, security and control across those stacks. And all from a self-service portal with representation of cost, representation of time, okay? And representation of what it is you're actually running. These are the things that help control VM sprawl and address all those business issues that IT is facing today. And of course, the vCenter Operations Management Suite, and there's a good chunk of security context in there as well. Everything from dependency mapping, so actually understanding what an application consists of, but also around configuration management and ensuring that from bottom up and top down, we can ensure that you have PCI compliance, we can track changes in the environment, and we can report on them and easily roll them back as well. So that is that. We're going to focus a little bit on this piece now, which is obviously what we're here to talk about. So we have a very consistent and vision. We've had this vision for some time around what VMware does and how we approach security. So the first thing is obviously looking at platform. How do I secure that solid and proven foundation that you've come to all know and love today? How do I then, from an operational perspective, give you the tools that help drive that? And not just from ensuring things like compliance, but also who has access to the consoles that manage this new world of cloud and virtualization. We look at hypervisor introspection. I'll touch on that in a bit more detail later. But the idea is that I can get away from this whole agent-based security methodology around things like antivirus. Okay? Virtualized security. Again, I shouldn't be bound to a physical construct to protect this virtualized environment in the cloud that I've got behind it. We also look at things like logical trust zone security policies, and of course our integration with industry-leading vendors goes without saying. We have more integration points and APIs that that vendors can plug into at a variety of different levels to secure a variety of different places of the infrastructure. So let's do a bit of a journey on that now. Using vCloud Networking Security, we bring security boundaries to a number of different areas. And you heard me coin that term virtual data center before. So with that one, obviously, we have the edge-based appliances, which consists of a range of different firewalls that you can actually scale, whether it's a small firewall from maybe a development environment, right up to an enterprise-grade firewall with high availability and all the other bits and pieces that surround it. So that's the larger container. That's one security barrier that we bring to the mix. The next one you have a look at is the application and the endpoint side. So being able to establish these trust zones, being able to establish these boundaries unique to an application, again with their levels of availability intact and the ability to still move them around the place. This is agile security, for lack of a better term. It's security that moves with the flexibility of your infrastructure. And of course, you get the visibility and control around that. We then have a look at the larger container around the data security. So how do I do discovery around sensitive data in line with compliance standards? Okay, doing this on an individual machine-by-machine basis gets quite long and laborious and quite painful. Being able to do it across a complete infrastructure seems to be a far more efficient and effective idea in my mind. And of course, the configuration management. So where we establish both host and application compliance in line with those industry standards, which we are progressively adopting as time goes on. So the idea around the private cloud and what we're doing, oh, that's my timer, that's nice, it's working well. The idea from the, and I did actually short time that one, so I get some time back. The idea of this, we can actually bring security right from the edge of your infrastructure all the way through to the endpoint and the interface to the people as well. So let's have a look at a couple of just some of the technology examples that we implement and some of the use cases. So hypervisor firewall and infrastructure hardening. It's quite, in the scheme of things and looking comparatively again from a competitive standpoint, it's quite easy to secure something that only has a extremely small footprint versus something that's large, bloated, and has a lot of baggage hanging onto it. So our nearest competitor's hypervisor takes up a footprint in its smallest install of 5 gig. Comparatively speaking, we're 144 meg. That's just a little bit of a difference. And so we can have some pretty amazing security guarantees on these platforms by being able to contain it and do some pretty amazing things on the code side as well. Beyond what we do from an architectural perspective, we can also harden the hypervisor with its own built-in firewall at the same time. Now, these are important things. It saves you having to have an environment that looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. Hardened virtual machine operating systems at scale. So this is just a sample of some of the standards that we actually use across our vCenter configuration management platform. And the idea about addressing this in scale is, again, I'm not having to go one by one, is this compliant, is this compliant? I can bring compliance and configuration management visibility across an infrastructure. Okay, again, it's an efficient way of being able to drive more effectiveness out of your security practice. This is a big one, and this is where we have one of the largest integrations, one of the best integrations with Trend Micro. And actually, Trend Micro today are leading the charge as how they utilize our technology to bring effectiveness and protection to your infrastructure. So if you have a look at the use case example there, introspection is key on this. So most vendors, the traditional way of doing things, and this is why I say things have to change, has been agent-based. So you have the old way of doing things, you had a physical server and it had an agent on there that protected that one physical server. What happens, do you think, when a scan kicks off on that? Get a bunch of drive activities, CPU cycles are burnt, things start happening around there. It's all very exciting. What happens when I then take a physical machine, drop a virtualization layer on top of it, and then I have 15 or 30 machines running on top of that? And each of those machines has an agent. What happens? Yeah. You get a storm happening, a scan storm. Goes through, drives your disk I/O through the roof, all of a sudden your levels of service drop, your network falls over. Oh, it's horrible. This solves that problem. This actually solves more than just that problem, because not only are we removing the agent from the virtual machine, we're going agentless in this scenario here. What we're also doing is we're giving you protection as soon as you turn the virtual machine on. Because the old way of doing things from a security perspective is you built the machine and then you had to wait for the agent to get to the box, get updated from when it was turned on. So that is literally a period of either seconds or minutes or hours, or it could actually be worse, but that's an exposure risk. Anything can happen in that period of time. So the idea that I can now switch on a workload, whether it's a desktop, whether it's a server, whether it's multiple applications, I can actually go down the path of doing that quite effectively. They're protected as soon as they switch on. All right, so this is what we do, and this is through Trend Micro's deep security portfolio and how we integrate with our vShield endpoint platform. We also have a look at, finally, at our data security side. And this is where we can do continual sweeps across a complete infrastructure to have a look at which data is compliant and which isn't, and what needs to be addressed and what doesn't, okay? 3-step processes articulated up there. And of course, these things are all independently verified. We wouldn't have the success that we do today, we still wouldn't be the largest player in the market if these enterprises didn't believe that we were capable of actually doing this. So we have certifications up to the wazoo, which is what you want to be. You want to have absolute confidence that we are certified against those best industry standards to ensure that your stuff is protected and secure. So as a final call to action, rethink how you secure your virtualized and your cloud infrastructure. Okay, start looking and investigating the different platforms, capabilities that can actually bring some efficiency on this path. Build your roadmap to a software-defined data center, and this will become clearly more evident in the second half of this year. Although you can start the journey today. As a matter of fact, start planning today to get there, because it's important if you're going to realize these efficiencies. Check out the VMware breakout sessions. There has been a bit of a common theme around bring your own device, or as I heard the term earlier, bring your own disaster, which I thought was quite clever. So we're going to have a stream dedicated to end-user computing, how you can avoid that one and realize some of the efficiencies that actually come from mobility, certainly of our portfolio. Head to the booth, check out some of the, have a chat with some of the lads, but also there's an opportunity to fill out a form and win a Nike sports watch, which is a different trinket than an iPad, admittedly, which is refreshing. And last but not least, of course, go and check out the link on there, which leads you to a complete portfolio of our security capabilities and reference guides as well. So on that, I'd really like to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure presenting to you at my first Evolve, and look, I wish you the best for the remainder of your afternoon. So thank you very much for your time.